strengthen our faith, and that He will fill in the blanks of our understanding. We pray on behalf of our fellow Christians and fellow citizens who may be ill with various types of viruses and so forth. We pray that You'll give them healing. It's Your will. In Jesus' name,
Amen. Thank you. So, we're back at Jerusalem today. I think everybody's been in here at least once or twice and knows that we've been going through this now. This is our 13th week of all these different places around the Israel area and outside of that in a couple places. But today we're looking at just the city of Jerusalem, and there is a golden arrow down there toward the lower part of that map that's pointing to where it is. So that gives you an idea of what is where we're focusing our attention on. Just south of Jerusalem, or almost to the side of that arrow point, is Bethlehem. So we're looking at very close to the place where Jesus was born, although you'd have to go up north just a small distance, it's not that far, to that beige area called Galilee, and that's where Jesus did most of His work. And so Galilee encompasses Magdala, where Mary Magdalene is from, Capernaum, and a few places like that. The Mount of Beatitudes up toward the top part of that, where they're suspecting that Jesus did the Sermon on the Mount, that is in that region, and there is one semi-mountain there. There's nothing huge like Rocky Mountains in this whole area, but there's lots of hills and some taller ones. And so the blue line down the middle is the Jordan River connecting the Sea of Galilee, that smaller body of water up to the north, Dead Sea then down to the south. Give you a visual of mileage or distance. The Sea of Galilee, the smaller little pond-looking piece up above, is 22 feet long and 15 yards, miles. Well, I want to say 22 miles long, feet would be nothing, and 15 miles wide. So obviously the Sea of Galilee is much bigger than that. The Dead Sea, rather, is much bigger as you go further south. And that's in your more of the desert region when you get down that way. Also around the Dead Sea, if you'll recall, off to the west side, there were several cave expeditions that took place in that area. All of those, or not all, but many of them have produced pieces of the Dead Sea Scrolls, or the compilation of all of those. They're still looking for scrolls in that area, in different caves. And all of that came about because of a couple little shepherd boys that were playing around in the field, and the story is either they went after a goat that got up into that region, they were trying to get it, or they were just throwing rocks. But either way, when they tossed a rock inside of a cave, it made an unusual noise and caused them to crawl up and get inside to see what was in there. And they found a portion of the Dead Sea Scrolls there, took it back to town and did a little investigating, which turned out to be nothing to start with. Some older man that looked at the material thought it was ancient, but he didn't think it was that important. And then eventually they discovered what it was about and began searching. And so, meanwhile, in that whole region now, they still continue to excavate. And of course, up north too, around that beige area, all over that whole area. Just about any place you dig in that area, you're going to find something ancient there, which is quite unusual. So, looking at Jerusalem again, that point in the map there in that green area tells you a little bit about that. I forgot what I've got. My pointer I've got to adjust to here this morning. So, again, Jerusalem is a walled-in city, and so I used that to kind of give you a little bit of a visual of that as far as a diagram. A lot of different gates that composed entering into the walled city itself, and we've looked at that before. This is a picture of a larger diagram, but I wanted you to see both the diagram and also the picture itself to give you more of a visual. As you'll see it, the wall that circumscribes all of the Jerusalem area. And we're looking at it at a certain angle, so there are places that are highlighted on that picture, but there's all kinds of things all through the area. The actual diagram is found, or this piece of this, what I want to say here. The artwork here is described in the Israel Museum. And the yellow arrow points toward the first part of the construction. Good morning. And that was where the old city was, or David's, the city of David. And so primarily in the time of David, that was Jerusalem as far as that's concerned. The blue area up above where the blue arrow points then deals with where Solomon expanded that area. So it encompassed everything down to the south point here where the yellow arrow is pointing, and then all the way up to the other areas. So he more than doubled the area of the city of David when Solomon became their king. After that period of time, some large time later, when it fell under Roman rule, the Romans came in and expanded the area all the way out farther west and up north. And so that's what you see today as far as the old city of Jerusalem. Now, outside of that are homes, etc., in that whole area and around the region of Jerusalem, modern-day Jerusalem. But that is where the city of David was, or initially built. It's still there, and they're doing a large amount of excavation around that area and underneath it to find just a tremendous amount of artifacts and things. And Solomon's addition then is up above that. Encased in Solomon's addition is where they think the Ark of the Covenant was at one time. And it is built over the area that is also understood, at least some people believe, that Abraham actually went to, this is Mount Moriah region, to the Mount Moriah realms to offer Isaac as God had instructed him in Genesis 22. And so this location here becomes a focal point for everybody that has any kind of religion in that area, unless, I guess, pagan or whatever, but as far as you're concerned, because Abraham now connects to the Islamic religion, to the Jewish religion, and to the Christian religion. That all of them believe that he is the father figure in all three of those. And so this is the holy place for everybody. This walled-in area in this little diagram here is now belongs to the Islamic people because of some judgments that were done politically back not that many years ago. There was wars back and forth over that, and so there was a partial time that Israel was over that, and then eventually it got turned back over to Palestine. So the Islamic people are now under control in that area, and we'll see that in just a few minutes here. But the Palestine side of the wall is encompassed in the old city of Jerusalem. It has what's described as the Temple Mount, and that's where the Dome of the Rock is. The Dome of the Rock is in that area right here. You're looking at it more of an idea of what it was like during Solomon's time. But the Dome of the Rock now is inside this walled area, and you'll look at the gold piece just over to the left side of that wall. This is a part of the Jerusalem wall today. The doorways, most of them are sealed off, as you see in front of you. This is what's called the Golden Gates, this double domed or arced area in this section of the wall. The exterior wall where Jesus likely went in and out, and most likely went in when he went in being taken under Roman rule and put on trial. And so right on the other side of that is where the Holy of Holies would have been, and this is now where the Dome of the Rock is. The dome covers the rock where they feel like Abraham offered Isaac. Now, whether it's actually there, there's some doubt to some degree, but there's a good possibility that it is that area. So we did get to go through the Palestine area where the Islamic side is. To get into it, we came through another entrance that they had, and this is part of our group. just about any time that we were taking pictures, it was pretty wide open that we didn't have a crowd of people in front of us except our own people, because again, we went during much of COVID times just a short time ago, and so everybody was pretty much not allowed into Israel or were traveling anywhere. There was a short period of time that they allowed a small group to go in, and we were the test group, besides some high school and college age kids that came in. And right after we left, another small group came in, COVID came in, and they shut everything down again. And so I'm not sure today what actually is taking place, but we were allowed to get in with our small group, and immediately you see all the ladies with dark blue covers on and long sleeves. If they had short sleeve shirts, even if under our modern thoughts of what decency is, they had to have more covered up. And so they wore that. Men, if they had shorts on, had to put on some long pants that they had there right inside the gate. So we all dressed according to what was their requirements. A lot of their stuff that we're looking at dates back thousands of years, even if it doesn't date back all the way to the first century. And so much of the structures that we're looking at here were built back in about the year 1000. And so very ornate, very decorated. As you get into this area, in the Palestine area on this other side of the wall, one side is Jerusalem that belongs to Israel, and on the other side of that wall now is part of the Jerusalem that belongs to the Islamics, or the Palestine area. And so there's a large courtyard that extends itself all the way around that one section that we called the Dome of the Rock. And so obviously you don't see a lot of people walking around. There's our group walking through the area. There's some structures. They don't do a lot of excavating. Exactly, I don't know why. Are they afraid to find something that would cause them to have to give their property up? Don't really know that one way or the other. But you see remnants of pieces of pillars, etc., that date back at least 1,000 years. I doubt that any of these date back to the time of Christ. But nonetheless, it's a large area. Beautiful passageways around the courtyard that pass around this large area. It looks like a nice place that you'd want to spend family time. I didn't see anybody picnicking or anything like that, but it was a very pleasant walk around the whole area. You're noticing there's not a lot of people around. For those that had seen the Jerusalem side, and we looked at the Wailing Wall, and the difference in that day and time of day too, there were crowds of people still at the Wailing Wall where there's hardly anybody at this location. I'm not sure what it really indicates, other than the fact that there just weren't a lot of people when we went through that. And as you go up the steps and you get to the top of the archway, you can look and see the Dome of the Rock. That's the dome that covers over the building, that covers a shrine, and inside the shrine is the area where they feel like Abraham probably offered Isaac. And so it's a shrine over shrine over shrine. And if you remember, we talked about this concept of shrines. There's a tendency in man to build a shrine where something happened. And we have our political shrines, we have our military shrines, we have monuments and things like that dedicated to things that we did. And if you can do it on the site where it's at, that's the most important thing. And remember now that in Matthew 17, when Jesus took Peter, James, and John up onto a high mountain and he was transfigured before them, there was Peter's comment and thought that we should build 3 shrines here, one for you, one for Abraham, and one for Elijah, the 2 others that were there with Jesus conversing at that one moment. And so that concept of putting out a shrine is not an uncommon thing. Not to say that it's something that God's after particularly, but it's a concept in man's mind to do something, to dedicate an area. So that's what they have. And they've got a shrine on a shrine to dedicate what's going on. The archways that you're looking at, probably dead center in the picture, there's a drop-off where some stairs go down to the archway. Those are the doors that are sealed off from the inside to the Golden Gate doors that we looked at just a few minutes ago from the outside of the wall. So it's sealed on both sides. And if you'll notice the structure isn't, well, I'm just going to back up just a bit to that one picture and mention something about that wall. You notice that the wall itself doesn't just have gates, but the whole gate has an extra section to it that's built out about 2 meters out from away from the wall, and does the same thing on the inside, and it becomes an extra protected area. So you have to come in through the gates, and if you want, during times where you're dealing with wars and all, you can pack that area or man that area with soldiers to protect the city. So the gates is the place that they would want to try to get into. So there's some extra protection. The height of it is a little higher, and you notice the zigzag work up above, set up for soldiers, etc., to hide, to do or whatever, shoot arrows down or whatever along the way. And so back to the inside of the gate, that's the inside, and again, sealed off, and there were towers, etc., along the way. And so I've just snapped a few pictures of that. This is another angle, another archway, again, leading up to the Dome of the Rock. If you get a little closer to it, you can see there's a tremendous amount of ceramic pieces ornately decorated around that. The dome actually has gold on the top of it. It's not been there forever. That was an addition that was given from I think it was one of the Saudi princes. He sold some expensive piece of property he had and shipped I don't know how many pounds of gold in, and so it's covered over that, just to kind of help honor what's happening in that area. So that gives you a little bit more of a picture, the octagon shape of this. We were not allowed to go inside. And so I wasn't sure, as our group was maneuvering around, whether we were even allowed to take pictures. But there were a lot of guards around. I did not take any pictures of them, so you're not going to see them in any of my shots. But I was concerned about what we were allowed to take pictures of and not allowed to take pictures. But that's one of the things that we did take pictures. Seemed like others are doing the same. Okay, back to the Golden Gate here. Again, that's the structure from the outside of the Jerusalem wall on the south side, looking up toward the gateway. This I took off the internet. As you look at one angle, again, the structure that's built out. And then that picture I showed you a little earlier, but it's just coming back around to it to emphasize how it's a boxed-in area, kind of stacked over the wall for extra protection. And yet nobody's allowed to go in and out of that area. This is an 1842 lithograph from someone that drew out a diagram of what the Golden Gate probably looked at like 1,000 years ago. And so it was a very ornate section, and term golden must have some impression as far as the value or the purpose of it, maybe not the cost or whatever that's in that. Okay, now, about some of the material itself that's in here. The Golden Gate and all the other gates that are around Jerusalem have purposes depending on what the nature of your business is. It's thought that the Golden Gates were very seldom used, except some people even think it may have been just for the high priest to come in at certain times of the year. Closest to the temple, as far as the Dome of the Rock, or to that area that they had. And so there's some question of whether or not Christ ever did go in and out of there, or was he taken through that or through some other gates. It's not directly across the street, or across the pathway from the Mount of Olives. And so that's where Jesus, spent his time praying. There's another gate that enters in that area. But I'll back up here just a bit. Are we still on? No, maybe not. Okay. Let me... came back up, didn't we? Okay. I want to pull up one little piece of information that I have here. Give me just a minute, please. Here we go. Now, the Dome of the Rock, and these are some details that I pulled off the internet. Again, it was in the section called the Old City of Jerusalem. The initial construction was undertaken in about 691 as far as over the dome itself. It was to replace the destroyed Solomon's temple that had taken place, destroyed by the Romans in 700 A.D. The original dome that they built collapsed in 1015 and was rebuilt from 1022 to 1023. It is one of the core areas of the oldest extant works of the Islamic architecture. Architecture and the mosaics were patterned around the Byzantine churches that were built also during that time. Its outside appearance had significantly changed during the Ottoman period. That's in the 1000 times. And in the modern period, the addition of the golden plated roof, again, 1959 to 1961. Let's see here. The Greek structures around that area built around 451 to 458, and also bring you up to the road that enters into Jerusalem at the gates. The foundation stone that the temple was built on, built over, is of great significance to the Abraham religions. And so as we talked about that, it covers all the different areas. Some believe not only is it where Abraham sacrificed his son, but they feel like that it has some dealings with God's divine presence there as far as the Islamic group, and that they feel like that some Muslims feel like that's where the Quran was developed and Muhammad descended into heaven. What their thinking is at that very point. So there's some beliefs that tie in that area as being holy because not just because of Abraham. That was one piece here. Temple Mount. Okay. There's some areas nearby there where it connects into or leads up to Hezekiah's tunnel that we looked at back some time ago. This 1,700-foot-long tunnel that tapped into the Gihon Springs. That was discovered by Warren back some years ago, who was excavating in the mid to 1800s. Established and built a shaft that connects in to that same area. Now I have one other article that I wanted to pull up here. Opposite side of that wall that we were looking at is also back up and look at this one picture here. Are we moving now? Not really. Okay, we'll stop there. The old part of Jerusalem on the other side of the wall is where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is. And you remember we looked at it back some time ago. I don't have the pictures up for that today. That they feel like that is where Christ's tomb was. So we're looking at two areas. Now I see it coming back up again. that are a focus for Christianity and also for the Jewish religion, and that Christ was crucified, and it's just right down from the extension of the wall itself, or on one side of the Wailing Wall. On the opposite side then has all of the properties and support from the Islamic religion. The Holy Sepulchre and the church that's built over that dates back to the time of Constantine, that when he converted to Christianity in 322-ish, brought about, and then 325 sent his mother Helen to this region to investigate some of these holy areas, and the prominent two places were the birth of Jesus and where he was buried. They wouldn't have looked as much at the rock of the Dome of the Rock rather, I say that backwards sometimes, the Dome of the Rock as much as the other two, because it doesn't relate quite as directly to Christ, although it's still a very holy segment as far as the early part of the Christian religion as it leads through the Jewish background. But the two locations are so close together, it's like a 5-minute walk when you leave through the Jerusalem side of the old city and you come to where we had to circle around the wall. I'm sure it's a shorter distance. You come through the old city area, you can cross over immediately back in that day and time without all these walls being walled up, the doorways being walled up. You could have crossed in immediately back and forth to these areas within a 5-minute walk. One of the most amazing things out of all of this, see if I can get this thing to keep going here. There we go. I'll start with the larger picture. Is that everything that focused on Christ as far as Jerusalem is concerned and his work within that area all took place in this little location, but it was, as they would call it, the holy ground that dates back 5,000 years before. That, let's go forward here. The southern section of the wall that's called the City of David, where the blue arrow is pointing to, goes back to the time of David. When you move forward and you add Solomon to it, we're looking at the same city area that Jesus walked in. Let's just back up to this one here. 1,000 years later. When we're reading our Bibles and we see all these different locations that Christ has gone to, where David has gone to, and we're looking at pages of distance as far as our fingertips are concerned, looking at the Bible, and we're imagining, or at least I was, that is someplace way beyond over here, and where Solomon was another location. And to stop and picture that everything that God had been doing through his people back to the time of David, and before that, and especially even after that, all focuses on this same area. And so when you're dealing with Solomon's edition or David in the starting of that, this whole area is the ground where God's people initiated from Abraham all the way through. So take time as you're reading the Bible to notice different places that focus on, we'll back up to that first map, to where Christianity is. The legend at the bottom of the map here, that you probably can't read the details on, I have to get up close here to see. The line that has the mileage here on the bottom, the largest line which was on the map that I took the picture was an inch, but that represents 50 miles. So if you're looking at the distance from Jerusalem, for instance, all the way up to the beige area, distance-wise, you're not looking at much more than about 150 miles. Now, mindful that in that day and time, for the roads that they had, that's still quite a bit of time traveling. But when you're looking at a sector of land, considering that as opposed to the entire world, we're still looking at something like traveling from here to Nashville distance and nothing more to get to from Jerusalem all the way up to the area where most of the Jesus's work concentrate on. Now, just a little bit north of the Sea of Galilee, the smaller bluish area, the Jordan River goes a little further up. One of the tributaries heading off to the right is Caesarea Philippi, or Caesarea, depending on who pronounces it. It's a different Caesarea than was mentioned where above Joppa area, down here below, this little blue dot never shows up. Just a little bit west of where it says Samaria, there's a Caesarea there. That's where Cornelius's people came to find Peter, to get him, or in Joppa actually, to go to Caesarea as far as that time. But what I want to point out is that the Caesarea up above at the end of the tributary looks like the most northern region that Jesus did most of his work. Now, maybe he was up on Mount Hermon at some time, and that may have been the Mount of Transfiguration. But the distance that we're looking at of the entire work of Jesus before Paul came along is within a distance of from here to Nashville. And most of the work was concentrated all around the area of Galilee. As you're looking at what's going on in these areas, realize that God has been doing work in this same area for a concentrated number of times. And that to me is something amazing. Questions or comments in any way? I know Pat's been there, and yes, Lisa. Okay, the question is for those that may not have heard online, how does ethnicity relate as far as being restricted in traveling in those different areas? And I'm not positive. I do know that we had a Jewish person leading our group who was designated to us in addition to our tour guide who came from Kentucky. And he had everything connected with someone who is pretty connected as far as tourism in Israel. Somehow they knew how to get into the Palestine side of the Jewish wall, as we just looked here in Dome of the Rock. But the methods and what he did to get us in, and could anybody get in, I'm not sure. Now, he's considered a secular Jew, so he's of Jewish background. He did not wear the dark clothing and the hat and all that, so I don't know if they'd allow someone in that area. I didn't see that happening. The question might have been, would a Jewish person even want to go over on that other side? And who was allowed in? They didn't ask us what our faith was as far as entering, but we were required when we crossed over into that area to be checked by guards as we entered into a protected little area. And in addition to that, there were things that we could take in and not take in. Jackets we could take in, backpacks we could not take in, and we could not carry a Bible into that area. And they very specifically told us that wasn't allowed in. So I'm not quite sure who would be caught in one area or another. Were the Palestinians really even interested in crossing over? The walls itself, the Golden Gate area that we talked about that was sealed off partly for protection on both sides, because they felt like at one point in time that the leading terrorist organizations were looking at the possibility of using that walled gate as an opportunity to enter in closer to Jerusalem. So The Israelis were happy to have that sealed off, so that couldn't take place, even though it brought them into the Islamic side only. There's still just a patio or a courtyard distance to get to the Wailing Wall from the opposite side. And so there's not, I don't think, a lot of interaction between the two. And as far as they're concerned, there's basically three types of people. There's the Jews, the Palestinians, and everybody else that would encompass that large category of Christianity. And so who interacted in that, I don't know. But we were allowed in, and I know we had to pay some fees or whatever to enter into certain places. That was handled by our tour. But exactly who could have walked up individually and gone in, I don't know. If you just traveled over there, whether they let you in or not without some special permission that was taken care of by your tour guides. Pat, did you have something? Okay. All right. So back to Jerusalem and the wall. It's amazing when you think of all the things that happened around that area, even outside of Christianity or the Jewish background, and how God was using all of the things that were transpiring to bring about His will. When Jesus came on this earth and was born in Bethlehem, just a short distance from where that little gold area is, and He ended up in Jerusalem finally in this section, the walls itself, from where it says Mount Zion and the lower part and all that, Armenian quarters, Jaffa Gate up that way and all the way around, that didn't exist. It did exist, but it existed because of what Herod extended in this whole region. The prominence of Jerusalem and the impact that it was making in the Jewish culture was partly due to what the Roman Empire was doing in extending itself. It was the Roman Empire that extended the walls of Jerusalem, because initially it was just that box right here and a little bit down toward the Dung Gate, the Jewish quarter. And so that was the section that the Jewish people had. It became more of a prominent place because of Israel living into where the Roman Empire focused a lot of its attention. Now, it wasn't Rome, but nonetheless, it was a major section. And God utilized all of those things to make it a focal point for where Christianity would begin at the right time. So He's watching His people working in this area for thousands of years, different tribes and different nations interacting and warring along the way, to the point where Rome establishes this prominence. Now think about this, that starts somewhat in that area and extends all the way through Europe. And so the pathway to getting from Jerusalem all the way through this sector where Paul does all of his missionary journeys, all the way to Rome, is totally free. You're talking about who has access. Every Roman citizen had access to go through any of that area because it all belonged to Rome. So when Jesus comes to this earth and dies in Jerusalem, all of these people that are connected to anywhere to the Roman Empire now have access to the entire known world in that day and time. The persecution that comes upon the church initially by the Jewish people, starting with the stoning of Stephen, and then the persecution that broke out in Acts chapter 8, and the Jews that were scattered abroad were easily scattered and easily run to these different areas because they were part of the Roman Empire and they could go to any of these cities. And as they did, they also were able to expand the church in those areas. It wasn't like they had to have a passport to move from one location to the next. Rush. I didn't notice. My guess would be stronger the individual countries, although there's a strong influence in that whole area about who gets to do what. It's a delicate balance. You remember the Church of the Sepulchre that we just mentioned a while ago. We talked about it some time ago, that it actually is utilized by 3 different religions, and they don't necessarily interact with one another. The Roman Catholics, the Greek Orthodox, and then the Armenians, that's right, who see themselves totally distinct from one another. And they're still using that same area, but there's a balance of they got to be careful what they can do before they offend somebody else. And so this is constantly, it's kind of like tough guys walking back with one gang to another. Just bear this. And as they breeze by, they kind of shoulder bump one another. But they don't get out and just push. They just kind of press their way when they can. Right before we were to go into the tour, besides the virus issue, Ramadan takes place. And they started shooting rockets into Israel. This is like 2 weeks before we're supposed to go, or 3 weeks. And the tour guide got on with us on a phone call, and he said, now I want you to understand. He says, all that's taking place, but it'll die down soon. It just always does. He said, because they have to have tours to go through there. And his wife added in, and because it's Ramadan, they're fasting right now, so they're hungry and angry. So they're shooting at one another, but it'll quit as soon as they can eat. And so sure enough, all this takes place. And so it's a balance of who's doing what and the festivals and this and that, but they can't go too far because they've got to still have the tourists and life, and it's got to continue existing. And they just live that way. And every year it seems to be that way, but it's an unusual balance that who knows exactly who is in control, but they don't want to press it too much one way or the other. They just kind of nudge one another, send a rocket here or there, whatever. Anyway, that was the second bell, so we got to stop. Thanks for your comments and your questions, and we still have at least one more section next week that we'll talk about, and that's the Pool of Bethesda, among a few other things.